Thank you all for joining us for the March MSP-Ignite webinar edition of our monthly webinar series. As always, we're excited to be bringing the Resource Network webinar series to our members and invited guests. All of the presenters speaking in this series throughout the year have made a commitment to provide our membership with actionable insight into areas that can help them grow or otherwise impact their bottom line in a positive way. Before I introduce today's speakers, let's go over some of the logistics and ground rules. At least those of you that are on will get this down. Yes, we are recording this session, and we will send you an email after the webinar with a copy of the slides and a link to the MSP-Ignite YouTube channel, where you'll be able to watch the presentation again, share it with others, whatever you like. You will all remain muted during the presentation. However, this is an interactive session after we hear from our sponsor. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions. It's a lot easier if you do that than the chat, so please try and use the Q&A button for us. If you really would like to be taken off mute to speak, just raise your electronic hand and we'll try and accommodate and make that happen. I say that knowing my team has to do that, so I hope that's okay. And we'll get going. Our keynote today, really the person you probably came here to hear from, is Justin Reinmuth. He's the CEO and founder of TechRug, the Technology Risk Underwriting Group. Since 2004, he and his team have had the responsibility of managing risk and creating policies for over 16,000 IT companies in the areas such as cyber liability, errors and omissions insurance, management liability insurance, commercial crime insurance, and business owners insurance. If you've been active at all in the channel, you've heard Justin's name, you've heard of TechRug. They stay active in providing content and information. And it's important that you realize that hearing him now is only the beginning. The rules keep changing, the rules of the game keep changing, and I'm sure he'll share more. Of course, webinars like this don't take place without the assistance of our valued partners and sponsors. Today, we have the pleasure of being sponsored by Unitrends MSP. The focus today is to highlight 4 bad BCDR habits MSPs can cash in on, basically identifying opportunities for you. We're fortunate to have General Manager of Unitrends MSP with us today. Good afternoon, Naj. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Steve. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. As Steve mentioned, my name is Naj Raza. I'm the General Manager for Unitrends MSP, which is a Kaseya company. I joined the company last year in August, but I've spent 10 years in the IT channel working with MSPs. And I started off at Datto. Actually, I was back in the day, I was employee number 18. I was Vice President of International Operations with them for 6+ years, opened up all of their international locations where 25% of their revenue comes from. And then in 2017, I started my own cybersecurity company. It's still around in the channel. It's called Zorus. Did that for the past 3 years. And then I had the fantastic opportunity of jumping back into the BCDR space here with Kaseya. So today, my goal here is to show you 4 bad habits that end users are doing today that MSPs can use to their advantage, turn those challenges into opportunities, and especially as they relate to business continuity and disaster recovery, turn them into revenue opportunities. So let's jump right into it. What I've seen, number 1, messy mailboxes. We see many users don't have proper hygiene with their inboxes. And around that, there have been phishing schemes that target exactly this vulnerability, right? And if you think about it for a second, the messier an inbox is, the more of a risk there is for an email to slip through that the end user wasn't paying attention to. They click on a link, and from there, either credentials are compromised or possibly even ransomware gets downloaded. So we've seen individual phishing schemes come out that target exactly this type of a user. And ultimately, it creates a huge risk, not just for the individual entity itself, but also you as the MSP, because now you're running around trying to explain to these users what exactly happened, trace back the attack, if it's ransomware, and if they're part of some industry that's regulated, the fallout just starts from there. So that's one item right now that you can address through interactive trainings that you do with your customers if you're not already doing it. And then there's also, I'll address some more actionable items on how you can take advantage of this and turn this into a revenue opportunity for you at the end of this presentation. Number two, and we all know that it's as much as you can have a corporate policy around not using work devices for personal items, we see increasingly that personal web surfing on work devices happens all the time. In a recent survey that Proofpoint did, you can see that most respondents, 76% plus, said, hey, they're checking responding to email on their work device, which is what it's meant for, right? But then we also see that 43% also reported, and they have the ability to select multiple entries here, but they're reading news stories. They're viewing, posting to social media, right? Streaming media, music, playing games. And as we all know, this is a prime target for hackers, especially around the realms of malvertising, or especially around the realms of a drive-by download or botnets that get triggered through this. So having individuals go onto their work devices and do personal activities not only creates this increased risk of malware and phishing and data breaches that target that individual device, but as we've seen with the whole work from home explosion that has occurred, more and more users are now doing this, and more individual data is being stored. Personally identifiable information, client data, is being stored on these laptops or these remote devices. And to further exacerbate the situation, many users are outside of the corporate perimeter-based firewall, right? So the whole UTM that gets set up to protect an individual location, most users are working from home, so they're outside of that. So what this is doing is, inevitably, when they connect back in VPN back into the office, or if, let's say, they actually come physically back into the office, this is putting the rest of the corporate data at risk. And as we all know from ransomware and how advanced ransomware infections have gotten, there's a period of that the industry analysts refer to as gestation, where the ransomware will sit there and observe and listen and detect patterns, can detect ways that it can spread, not just from that device, but onto other devices, and even in some cases turn off, let's say, the backup appliance, or compromise backups and delete backups that are stored if there's no immutability of the backups. So basically, this is a very bad idea, and users are doing this regularly, and it creates this risk of this infection spreading across the entire corporate network and onto other users' devices as well. And we see some really bad password management practices with Office 365. This was a pretty interesting. I highly recommend for those folks that haven't seen the RSA conference from 2020, take a look at the individual section on Office 365 and everything related to breaches around password management. So what the speakers had done is they had taken almost 1.2 million Office 365 accounts are compromised each month. So what these analysts did was they used two different methodologies to prove just how easy it is to break into Office 365 accounts. They used first what's called password spray, which is essentially just using rainbow tables or using some type of a bot that can sit there and guess a variety of passwords. As we can see here, all of these accounts were using the password Spring 2020 with an exclamation mark. So 40% of those 1.2 million, 480,000 accounts were able to be broken into by just using basic password guessing schemes, using, let's say, a dictionary and a bot. And then the another 40% of them, 480,000, were compromised by replay, essentially going onto the dark web, pulling leaked credentials. As we all know, many times users are using the same password. So using those leaked credentials, guessing the username based off of a very similar username, maybe the domain was just off, and then using those passwords that were leaked on the dark web in order to compromise the Office 365 account. So once again, this is, as we all know, more and more users have been in Office 365. File servers are disappearing from on-site. They're going simply into O365, M365 as a SharePoint based usage. And in return, what's happening is there's this entire realm of risk that gets created now that there's more data in Office 365 and there's no adequate protection. Many users, many MSPs aren't backing up Office 365 data either. So we've seen items such as account takeovers, modified ransomware infections, where basically individuals, hackers are going in and stealing individuals' accounts, going in there, downloading all their data, and then locking them out. So once again, this is an opportunity for MSPs, not only to create some education, not only to create awareness, not only to sit there and have mandate password changes, but also protecting the users through some sort of a backup or some sort of an identification as well as breach remediation technique, which we can go through in a second as well. And finally, number 4, sacrificing recovery time objective for cost savings. We've all heard it. Our end users, our clients, they're very cost conscious, and they want to be able to roll out the most cost-effective backup solution. Cost is king. Well, what many of these users don't realize is, let's say you go with a very cost-effective solution that just uploads all of the backup data to the cloud. Well, if you have a terabyte or more that you have to download and pull out of the cloud, that's going to take some time. And especially many of these vendors that are more cost effective, there are no SLAs around when you have to download that data out of the cloud. How does it work? What are your speeds? Are you guaranteed any type of speed? Are you guaranteed any type of an SLA around it? And so there's a big education piece that has to happen that, sure, not every user is the same. Not all end user businesses are the same. So it has to come around, what is your appetite for downtime, and more so being able to understand that, look, you have critical data that if we can't access, if it's going to take us 48 or 72 hours to download that data and get you spun back up, what's the cost of that? And is that something that's palatable? So once again, this is an opportunity for MSPs to be able to generate additional revenue by educating clients that otherwise may not have known about the cost of downtime. So I laid out 4 challenges that are standing in the way right now for end users between them and proper BCDR habits. And I mentioned 4 very quick ways that MSPs could take advantage of that. Now, how do we then go from there and then jump into the unified BCDR aspect of things, which is this is what your peers are doing in order to be able to capitalize on similar opportunities. So let's jump in and first talk about unified BCDR. So here at Unitrends, we've realized that data now lives in more places than ever, and MSPs on average are using 3 or more solutions to back up these clients, whether it has to do with cost-related reasons or whether it has to do with where data is located. So we've solved that for MSPs. We've provided one single platform that has the ability that's complete, that can back up all of your data no matter where it lives, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on-prem, whether it's remote laptops, or whether there's a full migration into Office 365. So not only can we give you one complete solution that has all of your backup needs, not only can we automate a lot of these mundane activities that happen day to day, but also most importantly, we can save MSPs 30% or more over what they're currently paying. On top of that, we're bundling in a complete cybersecurity package into that as well. So whether it's anti-phishing, email scanning, hardened Linux kernels for ransomware protection, complete immutability of our offsite backups so ransomware we've built our platform with complete cybersecurity in mind. And one of the items that we covered, which had to do with compromised Office 365 credentials, we even have the ability to monitor the dark web for that. Finally, we also have a feature called Recovery Assurance, which completely automates disaster recovery tests, which is something that a lot of your peers are leveraging to create additional revenue opportunities. I promised Steve that this wouldn't be a product-based webinar. This is more so to provide you guys with tools and provide you guys with tips and techniques and how you can action these items and grow your MSP business. So I'm more than happy to cover this individually with any of the MSPs that are on this webinar. And then on top of that, to really show you that we're committed to helping you all grow, I've got a special promo that's just for those attendees that are on this webinar. Since we've been talking a lot about Office 365 and backup and how you can take advantage of that, we're going to get you jump started on that. Not only is our Office 365 licensing for backups 30% cheaper, 40% cheaper than all the other solutions out there, but also we're also going to give all those attendees that are on this webinar, if you take advantage of this promo, we're going to give you 250 free. So if you buy 250 Office 365 and G Suite backup licenses, which are already priced at 30% less than the competition, we're going to give you an additional 250 free, which really puts us then at that point at 60% more or 60% cheaper than what other solutions are charging you for this. So if you want to take advantage of this promo, all I ask you is that in the Q&A section, just so we can identify it, just enter in promo, and we're more than happy to reach out to you and offer this promo to you. So with that being said, that's my time. I'm going to turn it over to Justin here for our keynote presentation. Thanks so much, everyone.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Great job. So my name is Justin Reinmuth. I'm with TechRug, the Technology Risk Underwriting Group. And Steve said we specialize in working with MSPs on the cyber liability, errors and omissions insurance. Excuse me, but we also help them out with a multitude of other type of insurances. But really, what an MSP will come to us for is essentially the cyber liability, errors and omissions insurance. And as he mentioned, the landscape, and as everyone on this webinar is probably familiar, it's consistently changing. And as most people know, I mean, we've lived in this for over 2 years now. The ransomware attacks, they continue to evolve. Luckily, I think between MSPs spending more time and paying more attention when it comes to in-house and double checking and making sure that things are up to speed. We've seen, at least with us, a decrease in the ransomware attacks. But the troubling, I guess, concern to us in 2020 and the beginning part of 2021 was, we've all of a sudden now seen a shift of, and this is kind of the theme of the webinar, is MSPs now, knowingly or unknowingly, are carrying liability for clients. Cybercrime we've seen since the beginning of this pandemic and the whole COVID thing has gone up 600%. So what we've seen is that clients they're not necessarily wanting to invest maybe in security. Some are, some aren't. As our last presenter said, there also is that work from home exposure. But what we're really getting into a situation where clients may or may not want to do certain things, but we're finding out that MSPs are not making them aware that they need to look at these certain things. So I guess I'll call it the 3-layer cake. MSPs really need to pay attention to on that first layer cake and educating the client that, hey, as the CIO of this organization, this is the standard that we have to follow, whether it's NIST, CMMC, ISO, COBIT, you pick it. That would kind of be the first layer of the cake. The second layer of the cake would be within that standard, here are the 40 things as an MSP that we can do for you. Again, it could be a SOC SIEM solution, it could be EDR and active threat hunting, it could be security awareness training, whatever it may be. Within those 40 things, here are the 5 things that you are doing with us today. And what we're continuing to see is that clients, and again, it could be for budgetary reasons, or maybe they just have, don't take security that serious, is that they're not wanting to do these things. And all of a sudden, this whole Office 365 business email compromise is just a complete mess right now. The clients, we saw in 1 week, we had 5 situations from an MSP where we had to turn in what's called a notice of circumstance. So basically we're telling our carrier, hey, it's not quite a claim, but there are reporting provisions in the policy that we have to let you know that there's a circumstance or a situation that could potentially lead to a claim. And we had one situation where it was 2 $1 million wire transfers. Coming back to the MSP saying, why didn't we have 2FA on our Office 365? We had another one down in Florida for $500,000. Another one, a nonprofit in Pennsylvania for $350,000. Another one in New Jersey for $110,000. So what we're finding now is the MSP's clients, their attorneys are coming back and saying to them, hey, I'm a little lost here. Obviously, you think 2FA on Office 365 is an important issue because the accounting firm down the street has it, but my client doesn't have it. And so, MSPs a lot of times don't have the proper documentation in that, hey, we offered this to you, you acknowledge that you didn't want to accept that, and therefore, because of that lack of documentation, MSPs are getting brought into lawsuits. We see it weekly now, unfortunately. And again, a lot of it is centered around the Office 365. Recently we've had to turn in some stuff with the whole Microsoft Exchange situation, which is, kind of where we, on this slide, where we point to the liability from the vendor. So, my point of this whole conversation is, if you're not cautious, we have to deal with 3 important factors or features, or I guess factors going on in the industry right now. The first one is the ransomware attacks. The second one is, as the Microsoft Exchange and the SolarWinds event, proved, is that, vendors, can be responsible for acts that would trigger the E&O policy. A traditional E&O policy is only or typically in place for negligence when you're providing a professional service to a client. Well, the Microsoft Exchange event was not negligence on our MSPs. Yet what happened was there was, stuff that again, it was a zero-day attack. There's nothing they could have done. But what we're finding on a couple of these lawsuits is one of them, which is kind of nerve-wracking if this is the direction they're going to go, is one of them that we had an attorney for our client or for the client was coming back to the MSP and saying, can you share with us your formal vendor management program? How did you know that Microsoft was a better solution than Google? And, if we start getting into that, I know, we do ask that question. Do you have a formal risk management program, or I'm sorry, a formal vendor management program? But, making sure that you have that in place, that to me is the fear, and the next wave of claims that are coming are, what kind of vendor management program do you have in place? Now, ultimately, right, I mean, Microsoft isn't going to allow you to go in and do some sort of third-party audit on their systems. But what that doesn't prevent is when we get to the point of what's the due diligence on why you selected vendor A versus vendor B. That's a troubling, suit that we saw, is because that, in terms of liability, it really opens what the MSPs are liable for. Because if you go through those contracts, through these various vendors, not only do they have very stringent hold harmless indemnification limitation of liability, but they also have what they call, a lot of them have end user agreements. And what those end user agreements clearly state is that the end user of this product, i.e. your client, they are cool with the hold harmless and indemnification clause and limitation of liability with, in this case, Microsoft. And I would ask the MSPs on this webinar is, did you share that end user agreement with the client? Because if you didn't, you just accepted the liability for them unknowingly. And so that gets you into a whole different scenario and a lot of trouble. So, if you're not cautious, right, we've got billions of dollars of vendors that are pushing the liability right on your shoulder. And then you've also got hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the size of your MSP, of clients pushing the liability right back on your shoulder. So you're sandwiched in between there. And, unfortunately, if you're not willing to look at risk management and risk transfer techniques, unless you're going to buy 10 or $20 million of insurance, which you're probably not going to do, we've got to adapt. We've got to work on some of these risk management and risk transfer techniques, because the days of even carrying $1 million limits, is not enough when we're seeing Bitcoin jump to, I think it was 55,000 this morning or something like that in that range. A year ago, this time it was 10,000. So, it costs us 5.5 times more if there's a ransomware attack. So, we're starting to see, limits wanting to be increased. But on the other side, you've got carriers, because they've been in this situation now for 24 months, and they continue to collect $1 from MSPs, but pay out $2.50 or $3. So a bunch of them are raising their premiums 3, 4, and 5 times, or they're just saying, hey, we're getting out of the MSP business altogether. We're a $24 billion carrier. We can focus on landscapers, bakeries, home and auto. We don't need this business. So, I don't want to see, and we're starting to see it a little bit, is that the availability of insurance is starting to shrink, because 50% of the carriers, we have 3 program carriers, but if a client wants to work with us and they don't fit into our program, we often get asked, hey, can you go out and secure us coverage elsewhere? And so we use our, risk assessment, some of the stuff that we have to negotiate lower rates for our clients. But 50% of those carriers don't return our calls anymore. So, we are seeing the availability of insurance shrinking out there. And, there's some obligations, I would say, and I'm in the MSP community as well, insurance so many, that we have to start changing the way that we approach clients, what we represent to clients. I just had a client this morning that had sent me something, and I just happened to check out their website, and their website said, no downtime, 24/7 security. So what that told me was, again, if I'm an attorney, because based on these lawsuits that we see, I don't have to worry about any downtime, because that's what your website told me. And I am 24/7 security. So there should be no one at any time during the day, 7 days a week, that should ever get into my network. So make sure that your marketing material, your website, your social media, it mirrors your contract. Don't get too cute, because these lawyers will take snapshots, and all of a sudden you're going to get into a lawsuit where, a lot of times we got to settle because of the situations that we were put into. And I know some of the people that maybe were on this, I think the last time, Steve, we might have done it was 8 or 9 months ago. But this is just something we constantly, preach to our MSPs is, protection, insurance, and contracts. You can't rely on 100% protection. You can't rely on 100% insurance, and you can't rely 100% on contracts. It really needs to be all three. And, a well-run MSP, when we go through it, because oftentimes when we get in these claims, right, we kind of get a peek behind the curtain because the claims adjusters need to see some documentation. They need some information. And the claims that we see go from $800,000 down to $80,000, the MSPs are doing all three of these things. So the protection is making sure internally they've got the right protection, making sure that the clients have the right protection. That'll lead into the contract portion as well. So the protection is what I would call first party, meaning the MSP, but it's also a third party, making sure that your clients, are properly protected. Insurance, again, get with somebody that, does this day in and day out, because I can't stress enough, cyber E&O policies, they're not all created equal. We just had to go through an update where we added cyber squatting and service credits as an endorsement under our policy. There's too many times I still see insurance policies where there'll be a failure to backup exclusion. And basically what the carrier is telling you is that if you are in charge of backing up the client's data and that backup doesn't work, and there's cost to restore that data, and they come after you for it, don't come knock on our door because we're not going to answer it. And so be careful. You got to make sure that, the insurance and, it properly, it's in place and it's got the proper and the correct insuring agreements to respond to a situation like that. And then again, the last part is the contracts, making sure you've got a strong MSA, making sure that you've got a detailed statement of work. I can't stress this enough. You need to go back to the clients. And I don't live in utopia. I 100% understand your clients have budgets and they aren't going to spend a certain amount of money with you. But that doesn't absolve you of the liability of making them aware that these are the 40 things that we can do from you. And these 40 things are a derivative of CMMC, ISO, NIST, whatever it may be. But, with that, you got to point out that here are the 5 things you're doing, because too many times in the early part of 2021, we are seeing the MSP's clients' negligence become the MSP's negligence because, oh, you didn't tell me I needed MFA on OWA. Oh, you didn't tell me I needed that SOC SIM solution. And again, you must have thought it was important because the accounting firm down the street or the nonprofit had it. Why didn't my client? And then we're going to turn to 12, or they're going to turn to 12 jury members in your city or your state and say, obviously they thought this was important. My client cleans teeth, cracks backs, and prepares tax returns for a living. They don't do IT. If the CIO thought it was important enough for other clients, why didn't they tell the CEO of the organization, i.e. my client? Therefore, we'd ask you to award our client this $500,000. So, I didn't want to talk too much because I know a lot of times, we get questions. Hey, I'd like to ask more questions or like to know a lot more. So I kind of just wanted to keep, to a quick 10 minutes and then open it up to, the audience if they had any questions, and I'll turn it back over to John and Steve.
Hey, Justin, we have a couple coming in already, and folks, just post in the Q&A or raise your electronic hand if you want to speak, and we'll work on that for you as well. I think you're right. It's 8 or 9 months ago that we had you with us, and I feel like it's a lifetime ago, right? It's the attacks keep coming. When you said 600% increase, I'm like, I feel like we know about every one of those that have happened too. Robin Cole asked if you anticipate carriers will begin to require third-party audits of an insured cybersecurity practices.
Yeah. So I mean, as much as we're talking about, some of the rates going up, and again, internally with TechRug, we've seen our rates go up, and not as much as the industry, but we have definitely seen it go up. Is that the premiums are still cheap, and I know people are probably going, "Are you kidding me?" But they're about 5 or 6 years ago, it was a land grab. You had a bunch of carriers coming in saying, "Oh, we think we can make money," right? They never anticipated the cyber extortion insuring agreement on your policy to be a kidnap and ransom policy. There is kidnap and ransom insurance out there. So if you go overseas or something, you call up your agent and you buy a special policy called kidnap and ransom insurance. So again, the carriers getting in, they didn't expect the ransomware to be used like it is today. So the premiums, and most MSPs have to realize that me as an insurance agent, I have to carry insurance agent E&O and then I have to make another phone call and buy cyber liability insurance. A doctor has to purchase medical malpractice, then they have to make another call and buy cyber liability insurance. MSPs get both. You get traditional E&O insurance, which is in place for third-party claims of negligence when it comes to providing a professional service, but you also get that first-party cyber insurance. So you really have two policies in one. So to answer Robin's question, when premiums for $1 million MSP are still at $2,100, even if they go through some sort of third-party audit, the premium isn't there for A, for them to invest the time, or B, to give you a discount and say, hey, by going through and getting a SOC 2 Type 2 or a SOC 2, what is it, cyber, what do they came up with the SOC cybersecurity or something like that. But anyways, to spend $15,000 or $20,000, to save $200, you're not going to find the MSPs that are going to do it. They'll say, screw it, I'd much rather pay $2,100. So as the premiums continue, if they do, which, unfortunately, like I said, if we keep seeing these trends and we don't do something about it, I think they will go up. But until premiums get to, $5,000 or $10,000 where the carriers will have the money and want to invest in doing some sort of audit service, I don't see it going. They do right now, they do these external scans. And again, I guess, when I have a risk engineering team look over, I think they help out with, maybe 20% of the risk, 15 or 20% of the risk. But it's still not like going through a SOC 2 Type 2. And even if you go through a SOC 2 Type 2, you don't get pen testing and vulnerability scanning. So, there's a lot of costs associated until the premiums start increasing. No, I don't see it.
So let me ask you this along those lines. We, as I think you'll recall, we have something called Secure Outcomes, a program that we provide for our members. Mm-hmm. And it really, the focus of it is mostly on tightening your own security controls internally so that you're in a better position to have these conversations with your clients about what they should be doing. And I know one of the topics that comes up frequently is just because the security control you're tying to says you have to do X, Y, and Z doesn't necessarily mean that's appropriate for your size company, let's say. And what it does mean is that you have to address and document why you don't think doing X, Y, and Z makes sense in your company, so that if you have that documentation and someone audits you or questions you down the road, at least you're showing, oh no, we were aware, we took action, we evaluated, and here's our reasoning why that doesn't pertain to us. Is that going to help anybody? Is that going to protect anybody, or is it case by case?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an attorney, right? I think, to me, Steve, we get a lot of questions centered around like critical action letters or waiver letters for clients that don't want to follow advice. Yep. But I just don't think it needs to go into that much detail. Like I said, recently we had a claim where an MSP did a great job on their SOW, listing all those 40 things that they can do. I mean, I almost, like I said, I envision what we see the trend going to from our MSPs that are 10, 20, $30 million is that, they're almost creating this master security checklist, again, yeah, referencing in a hyperlink the standard that they're following, NIST, CMMC, whatever it is. Within that standard, they are then listing, again, it's kind of like a master security checklist, but here are all 40 things, and a lot of them are getting to the point where they're putting the terms and conditions of the vendor on there, because again, I think that's extremely important. Going back, just pick a couple of these vendors, go through their contracts and make sure, do they have end user obligations, right? Where you're obligated to share with these end users the terms and conditions of that particular vendor. But I think what you're also telling the client, is that, and it helps us out on claims, it might not be very good at marketing, is that, the whole white label thing makes it look like you do it. So if you're representing to the client that you're doing it, guess what happens when we get in a lawsuit? You were the one that did it. You didn't tell us that Datto did the backup, or you didn't tell us that Microsoft did the email. So, we're starting to now see, links to these vendors saying, hey, when you click open you open your email in the morning and that Microsoft icon comes up before Outlook starts, it's actually Microsoft, the one that's hosting your email. We aren't, And so, I think that by creating that letter, that master security checklist, I mean, everyone's going through, and I know with COVID, it might've changed a little, but you're going through QBRs anyways. You're going through these annual security sit down, I would hope, these reviews with your clients, is why not just take them a list? I'm big into transparency and tell the client, hey, here are all 40 things we recommend. You checked 5 of these boxes. Are you sure you don't want to look at box 6, 7, or 8? Because if you don't, let's just sign here. And then that's what I'm going to pay attention to in 2021. And recently, like I said, with that claim, we think we have a really good fight with the MSP's clients that's trying to sue them because they went through and took the time to do that, Steve.
Right.
So, getting into, like you were saying, if it's technology and certain technology might not play nice and whether you got to do things, I think the overall conversation is, or the overall point is, make sure that you're fully transparent with the client on everything you can do for them, and make sure that they're aware, i.e. acknowledging by signing some sort of document. But I don't think you have to get into irritating them and saying, well, if you don't sign this document, we're not going to work with you, right? I mean, I think there's clients that might be grossly negligent, and with everything going on, I would probably tell you need to fire your 200 credit score clients because they will get you into trouble.
Right.
And there's a reason sometimes they became your clients, because the 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million won't take them, but making sure that you've got that and be transparent with the client and share with them everything that you can do and the things that they're electing to do with you. Because I can tell you, I even want, our clients, obviously I don't want to cut off and make it that they can't, market and pick up new clients, because then we won't have MSPs that grow and therefore their insurance premiums won't go. So, we definitely want you to, not irritate clients, but there has to be that transparency because, unfortunately with the Microsoft Exchange, I mean, I was talking to somebody and they said, they expect in the next 9 months to be, a supply chain issue, something else coming down the road. And I don't think these things, talking to our risk engineering team, the whole SolarWinds, they don't think that we'll get out of feeling the effects for maybe a decade. So I think these things are going to continue to pop up. And if clients don't have cyber insurance and they don't have a cherry tree in their backyard to go pick from, guess whose cherry tree they're going to pick from? I can tell you, I see it. They're going to come pick from yours because they aren't going to self-insure $150,000. They aren't going to do it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. We've got several questions. There was one, it's a little long, but Brian Weiss, one of our members, he shared this in a meeting a couple of weeks ago that, many of our MSPs out there are getting into working with more sophisticated clients, right? Co-managed situations where they're suddenly working with clients that are 10, 15, 20, 100 times their size, and they're just providing a little piece of the IT portion of their services. And Brian pointed out that he had one of these sophisticated clients that basically wanted to come right out and put in writing that they were indemnified. They knew the vendor was indemnified and the MSP was going to accept all liability for everything. And what Brian's asking now is he turned down the client, by the way, and said, how can I work with a client that's going to do that? But what he's asking now is, would there be a way to sell them a cyber insurance policy that basically limits their risk, but of course doesn't place it on the MSP?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the client carrying cyber insurance, I mean, I think that should be in everyone's MSA. And I think it's kind of a two-part approach. I think it needs to not only be in the MSA, but I would argue that, again, as the CIO of the organization, you've got kind of a fiduciary responsibility to say, hey, with everything going on and, cyber crime, up 600%, and all these ransomware attacks and business email compromises, I would highly, recommend that you look at a cyber insurance policy, because Steve and everyone, at the end of the day, 25% of the claims that we still see are a staff mistake and a rogue employee. And I don't know how we get away from that, right? But yeah, I mean, I would encourage, under Brian's particular situation or any of your particular situations, make sure that your clients are carrying cyber, because that's a funding mechanism for their mistake or for them not doing certain things with you. Now, some people ask, will the insurance companies, after they pay the claim, come back after the MSP? There is a thing called subrogation. So if you were grossly negligent and they're going, hey, are you kidding me? You're hiding behind this contract saying you're not responsible for anything, but you're letting my client get away with a firewall built into the router, and that's your version of a solution. You know what? We think you contributed to this loss. So we paid out $250,000. We're coming to knock on your door for $150,000.
Let me try and reshape that a little bit, Justin.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think the more sophisticated the MSP is, they all understand we should ask and say you need to have cybersecurity insurance, right? In the case of Brian's example, large client, they definitely already have some level of cybersecurity insurance. They are literally saying, if this backup device fails, we want you to accept the liability for it.
But
Is
my
there a
question-
policy that could be sold specifically to that?
No,
In
and you gotta be, you gotta be careful to Brian's question. I mean, on these hold harmless indemnification, there could be sometimes, you could be obligating yourself to something that the carriers aren't. In other words, this whole exchange thing, right? That's not negligence of the MSP. So under Brian's example, if something were to happen and that particular client were to suffer a loss and they sue the MSP, well, this isn't an MSP negligence. Now, if they come in and say, hey, vendor selection, why'd you pick Microsoft over Google? That's a different thing. But the MSP wasn't negligent in this case. So,
but if they can start, if end user companies can start to come after an MSP based on their vendor recommendations and selections, what's an MSP to do at that point?
Well, again, Steve, there are vendor management programs out there, right? There are templates that are available. I mean, get with it. At the end of the day, what that lawsuit said was, show us the process of why you determined or how you onboarded that vendor. Saying, hey, I met him at an event and had a drink with them, that's not going to pass. That's not going to fly. So you got to show that you did due diligence. I mean, I think, listen, we're starting to see a rash of attorneys coming into the cyberspace, personal injury attorneys and other ones. And you got to be able to show in that particular, this lawsuit that came in, you got to be able to show what process did you go in selecting that vendor. Ultimately, if you had a good formal vendor selection program, you're probably fine, but if it was, you didn't do anything, that's going to get you into trouble, whether I think it's right or wrong. I mean, I always tell clients, our attorneys are really good at defending you, but when you start shutting people down or causing people $500,000, $1 million, $2 million losses, their attorneys are pretty good too. So they're going to get creative and look for ways to come at you.
You used the term earlier, risk transfer techniques. Can you give an example of what a risk transfer technique would be?
Yeah, a great one is, kind of the third party terms and conditions. When you sit down with a client and, oh, you want to do this particular backup service, right? Or this particular email, just to let you know, we actually aren't the ones that are hosting your email. It's Microsoft. Here's their terms and conditions that was supplied to us to share with you. We're letting you know and make you aware of this. So if something were to happen, i.e. like this exchange event, don't come knock on our door. If you got to fight, if you want to pick a fight, go pick a fight with Microsoft, be transparent. So that to me is a risk transfer technique, telling the client, we don't actually host your email. It's Microsoft. Here's their terms and conditions. If something happens on their watch, go after them. Don't go after us.
So let me ask you this. I'm trying to think about how the average sized MSP just manages all of this. And one of the things I'm thinking about is, so clearly white labeling is now a bad idea.
Bad. Listen, I don't want to say, Steve, in terms of marketing and that sort of stuff and what it looks like.
Right.
I'm just telling you from a claims example, it's a horrible idea because we get killed.
I know, I totally get it. And listen, I think from a marketing perspective, you don't have to market who all your vendors are. But when you get down to the nitty gritty of signing a contract, at the very least, it should say, this service that we've offered you is powered by the following third-party vendors, right? At the very least, we have to go there, which is pretty interesting. Do you provide to your MSPs that you're working with, do you provide any templates or anything related to the vendor management process, or at least point them in any direction?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a risk manager that works with our clients and
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we do have a solution for that. Yeah, I guess, or like I said, I mean, I'm sure there's services out there. I don't know, because it seems like there's new things popping up all the time in this space. But maybe if you even Googled, like, I don't know, formal vendor management program, kind of gave your attorney or someone an idea, or your risk manager that's in charge of working with your MSP, maybe gave them an idea and run it by them and have them, tweak it so that Steveized. That would kind of be my recommendation. I mean, listen, there's a lot of things that we have to do, that we didn't have to do a year or 2 years ago as MSPs. I mean, I went to the dentist the other day, and a year ago, I didn't get my temperature taken, and I didn't have to do certain things that I had to do today. But guess what? Their malpractice carrier is telling them, you don't do these things, you don't get malpractice insurance, right? So, there are a lot of industries, whether it's a doctor following the AMA, a lawyer following the bar, an architect or engineer following the AIA, an accountant following the AICPA, me following the Department of Insurance. If we don't do certain things and follow certain standards, we lose our license. We just can't practice anymore. And, there's nothing like that today in the MSP space, but, there still are standards for you to follow. And I think, getting into this idea of kind of convincing your mind, hey, listen, we've got to do these things because it's laid out for us to do. It will become easier. It's just right now you've never had to do it and things are changing, and you got to keep up with the times, I guess, Steve, is what I'm trying to get at. Because if not, like I'm telling you, you start getting into these large losses, the attorneys on the other side are paid to get very creative to make sure that we pay out a claim.
No, it's
whether I think that's right or wrong, I'm not here to debate it. I'm just telling you, we've seen a ton of increase in claims, and they aren't the ransomware attacks. They are the client that's bringing you into their situation because a certain solution wasn't in place, or more recently, a vendor got the MSP into trouble.
100%. It's interesting. I'm thinking about it, and I sold my last MSP. It's now 8 or 9 years ago, and if I think about it, when I sold, really, if you had $1 million in E&O coverage, you were good. You were bragging about it, as a matter of fact, and using it as a differentiator between you and other MSPs, right? Today, that's irrelevant. Like, you're not even an entity without that anymore, and you have to go so much further. There's an interesting question. I think I know most of the answer to it, but I think it's an interesting topic. Matt Hoffman is asking us, hey, I understand why we want to have our own coverage for cybersecurity insurance. Why would we, as an MSP, why would we require our clients to maintain their own coverage? Now, I think part of that is so they can pay your remediation bill when they do have a problem.
Well, I think, yeah, it's probably that's good. I mean, there's a couple reasons. I mean, I would say from a revenue generating activity, cyber carriers, listen, I'm on these calls. They wouldn't, they tell me all the time. I mean, I don't understand why a client doesn't have these basic things in place. So now all of a sudden what you found is that the insurance carriers are starting to go, hey, you know what? No 2FA on Office 365. Guess what? We're seeing a ton of business email compromises. Everyone else gets cybercrime at 250,000. You get it at 10,000. You want to start looking at security? We'll up it to 250. Hey, you don't have a backup inaccessible from the network? Guess what? We're paying too much out in ransomware attacks. So we're going to limit the cyber extortion portion of your policy to $20,000, and everyone else gets $1 million. So I would say, Steve, from a revenue generating activity, if the carriers are starting to mandate that the clients do more to achieve a policy, that means more service offerings are going to be purchased from the MSP. The other thing is, from I guess a CYA exercise is, if your client doesn't carry cyber, okay, I would ask you the 2FA example, right? If the client doesn't have 2FA on Office 365 and something happens, do you want them to come at you, or do you want them to go to their cyber carrier and say, hey, we just had a business email compromise for $150,000. Can you pay us? Because if they don't have that cyber policy to go after, I'm telling you who they're going to come after. I see it. They're coming right after you, Matt.
Great point. There was, I know this always leads us, I feel like every time we're together, we lead down this one path. That concept of a $1 million MSP with a cybersecurity policy for around $2,000. Someone's asking if that's a good benchmark, and literally says my insurance quoted 50% higher for much lower revenue. Is some of that dependent on you as the MSP and what they see in you and your practices, or is there no rule of thumb for this?
Yeah. So, there is a rule of thumb. I mean, if you're going to, with TechRug, for example, I know we're not to market or what, but we have like a risk assessment, right? So we get discounted pricing for our MSPs. I can tell you outside of our program, the rate is double what we would charge our MSP, but there's an expectation that we have a third party and we go through these things, in order to get that. If not, the answer to your question is you are now leaving it up to the actuaries at the insurance carriers to tell the underwriting, hey, guess what? We just crunched all these numbers And we found out that for every dollar we collect for an MSP, we pay out $2.50. Therefore, underwriter, we need to charge $4 because we are a for-profit company, And so it's going to be based on the carrier's, loss ratios, how much they're paying out. But again, the carriers, and this is going back to the question about like third-party audits, they still aren't treating or separating 200 credit score MSPs from 500 credit score MSPs from 700 credit score MSPs. I know internally we do, but you're just leaving it up to actuaries because remember, these are $24 billion carriers. They're not going to take and get in, down in the weeds with these MSPs. If they aren't making money, they'll just pivot and sell something else. They don't have to be in this cyberspace.
So what you're saying is that all of the work we may do as a well-run, security forward-thinking MSP is not necessarily going to help us in our cybersecurity rate in any way, shape, or form, but it may help us fight against claims against us.
Well, I think again, if you go to somebody that specializes, they've probably worked it out and said, hey, we'll take our MSP through this certain process. Therefore, we'll tell you if you're getting a 200 credit score, a 500 credit score, a 700 credit score MSPs, and you can price it accordingly. If you don't go through that exercise, the carrier isn't, they're going to ask some basic questions. They're going to make sure that you're doing certain things. But at the end of the day, they don't really differentiate between a 200 credit score MSP and an 800 credit score MSP. Therefore, most of the carriers, I can't speak to all of them, but most of them out there, if you're a $500,000 MSP, you either qualify or you don't qualify, but they're not taking the time and saying, well, the qualification, this MSP is a 500 credit score MSP, this one's a 700 because they're doing these things. They're providing security recommendations to their clients. They are getting it in writing. They are making sure that the rejections are documented.
Right.
That's a 700 credit score MSP. They get a different price. But overall, the insurance carriers aren't there yet. The premiums aren't enough, Steve.
Yeah. No,
I know people are going, wow, I pay $3,000. But again, if you're $1 million MSP and you're paying $3,000, look at it and say 50% of that is E&O insurance,
right,
which everyone has to carry, traditional E&O. And the other 50% is cyber liability. Because remember, you're getting two policies in one.
Right.
Don't take your eye off that ball.
As we start to wind down, we're down to the last couple of minutes. And if there's any more questions, post them now because we're almost out of time. But is there a rule of thumb for how much coverage I need based on my yearly revenue?
No, I would say that, revenue is not tied to that at all, because if I get an MSP that does $1 million in revenue and they support all bakery clients, that's different from the $1 million MSP that has two clients and they're both hedge funds.
Right.
So, we work with our clients, but how much assets under management, quote unquote, do you have? We're going to treat $100 million, an MSP that supports $100 million different from somebody that supports $300 million, So the revenue is not tied to the limits that you need to carry at all. And then there's obviously, there's probably 20% of this equation, Steve, that we can answer, right? When you take out the policy in 4 months from now, is Bitcoin going to not be 55,000 and 80,000, or, I've been on ransomware attacks where, they negotiate, some don't. I've been on ransomware attacks where, they send us a decryption key and it works the first time and it doesn't with another group. And then I've been on it where when we do pay for the decryption key, 30% of the keys work or 80% of the keys work. You're talking the difference between 4 days of downtime and maybe 12 days of downtime. So that 8 days of downtime that's uncertainty, if you've got, we'll just say it's a week, but if you've got $52 million of clients that are tied up in an extra week, that's an extra $1 million that they're going to sue you for, because there's 52 weeks in a year. Divided by 52 million, that's $1 million a week.
Yeah. I've got a post here from someone, and I think it's important to point it out. And while you're always willing to provide information on these webinars, and I appreciate it, and always willing to jump in with our members on smaller calls and smaller groups, when I see someone point out we're a $2 million MSP paying $8,000 a year for a $1 million policy, I'm going to say that in order to comment on that properly, they should probably reach out to you and talk about coverage.
Yeah, I would say to that, and that sounds extreme. That's really high. So, are you using contracts? Did you, not pass the risk assessment you were given. I mean, there has to be something else going on, or maybe that particular carrier is just getting hammered.
Right.
You know, again, the other thing I just highly emphasize is that, again, these policies are not created equal. So, you know, as
Right.
much as you just want to look at price, when we get policies like, hey, Justin, we want to switch over, how does your policy compare? Well, a lot of times clients will say, hey, you know, we've got a cyber liability, errors and omissions insurance policy. And then when they send it to us, it's like, well, they don't have coverage for PR. They don't have coverage for forensics. So I guess if they call that cyber, then that's cyber, right? I mean, but I wouldn't call that cyber, but someone else is. So it's such a generic term. It'd be like me asking the audience, you know, what's your typical managed service client look like? Does that include, you know, EDR and active threat hunting or not? Because some would say it would, some would say it wouldn't, you know? So the devil's really in the details, you know, much like, you know, if you were going through to get a surgery on your knee or your elbow or your heart or something like that, I'm sure you're going to sit down with the surgeon and say, you know, do you specialize in this? Or, you know, how many surgeries have you done? Because if it's the, hey, you know, we also do ear, nose, and throat surgeries. We also do, you know, other types of surgeries. Yeah, and we get to, you know, the knee when we can. You're probably going to go, hey, this isn't the best situation because I don't know if this is going to turn out right. You know, so don't leave it up to the carriers to tell you, oh, you need to add this endorsement because the underwriter is paid by the carrier.
Well, and the interesting thing is, and I was waiting to see if he was going to add more because I knew there was more to the story. But if you've gone through some breaches with your clients and had to disclose it, I'm going to assume that your rate might be affected by that.
Yeah, I mean, if you had how far out are they from the claim? But yeah, I mean, if you had a ransomware attack and the carrier paid out $1 million and you went from 4 to 8,000, I don't think that's horrible.
Right.
I mean, you got to remember at the end of the day, okay, so you pay $4 more thousand for the next 3 or 4 years because that's the window they're probably going to hold it against you. So, you know, you just paid, we'll use 4 years. You just paid an extra $16,000, but the carrier just paid $800,000 out. So my math isn't the best, but you're still ahead.
Fantastic. Well, we're down to the last minute or two. As always, Justin, great job. Naj, great job as well. I appreciate you hanging in there and sticking with us. If anyone has a question for Naj that they want to throw out there right now, please do so as I finish up, and he'll stay on. And if you stay on, we'll make sure we get it answered for you. But thanks everybody for your time today. Certainly hope the information you received was actionable and helpful. If you want to reach out more, you have all the contact information for everyone that participated on the screen right now. For those that missed it in the beginning, yes, this is being recorded. Yes, we will send you a link to the recording probably by tomorrow, along with all the slides and contact information. All right. So please feel free to reach out. If you're not involved with a peer group today and you'd like to talk to us about our money back guarantee, please reach out to me. Justin, Naj, thank you again for your time and expertise. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for your time.